and welcome to another episode of Spark Talk. Our recent episodes have addressed big world events and the seemingly unstoppable march of US imperialism. In today's episode, however, we are discussing a fight back, a class battle currently underway in New York City where 15,000 nurses are on strike. It is, in fact, the biggest nurses' strike in New York history, and the strike is currently in their 8th day as of Monday, the 19th of January, the day of recording. So to discuss what this strike is about, what it means, and how to make it successful, I'm joined by two members from Hospital Workers Building Union Power, a group of trade union militants trying to, as her name indicates, build union power. So I'm joined by comrades Edith and Ozan. Hi, comrades.
Hey there.
Hello.
Hello. Thanks for taking the time to come and speak to us about this is a massive strike. So tell us, actually, before we get into the strike, can you tell us about what you guys are? What is Hospital Workers Building Union Power?
Yeah. Well, we tried to pick a name that actually describes what we're trying to do. We are a committee of people who want to build the power of the unions in the hospitals in New York City. This means chaining them from the current leaderships. And we also want to fight for free quality healthcare for all workers and the patients.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Are you guys just in New York at this moment?
At the moment, we're just in New York, yeah.
Yeah, from different unions, different hospitals, but in New York so far.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. Okay, so I guess let's dive right into it. What's going on with this strike?
Yeah. Well, since COVID, there's been a real crisis in terms of short staffing in the hospitals, and it affects all the workers in different grades. But the nurses have been at the forefront, really, of trying to enforce what they talk about ratios. It's like the number of patients that each nurse should be looking after. And the bosses want you to do double the number of patients that's safe. Yeah, so the staffing ratios has been a major sticking point. And 3 years ago, they had a strike, which actually did win some language, in terms of, okay, the bosses agreed in writing to certain ratios. But these ratios were only enforceable by arbitration. So basically, if you're in an emergency room and you're horribly short-staffed, you can put in a protest, and the bosses may, some arbitrator will look at it 6 months later, and then they might decide to fine the bosses. So the nurses are still getting worked to death all these 3 years since the last strike, and now I know previous episodes of Spark Talk talked a lot about this. The world has changed. It's a reactionary period. You got Trump in power. The bosses are very aggressive. So they don't want to give any pay raise to the nurses, even though cost of living in New York goes through keeps going up and up and up. They want to attack the healthcare that these healthcare workers have. And they want to get rid of this language that they signed up to when they were, when there was a lot more popular anger at the bosses because of the COVID. So those are three of the key issues in this strike. And the nurses are fighting for their patients, because if the nurses are sick, if the nurses are not able to work properly, if they've got too many people to look after, this all impacts patient safety. Yeah, and they make that very clear on their signs, and that this is a fight for the community. This is a fight for healthcare. And workers' rights and patients' rights go forward together.
Yeah, I think that's an important question, which I'll come back to. Before we go a little bit deeper, which unions are currently on strike?
So the only union on strike at the moment is the New York State Nurses Association, and they only organize nurses. And the main hospital union in the city is actually 1199. It's part of the SEIU, which is a huge umbrella organization. 1199 organizes most of the workers who are not nurses or doctors, and they're in the same hospitals that where the niceness strike's happening. 1199 is in those hospitals. 1199 is they are not doing what they need to do, which is to actually join the nurses in strike action.
Yeah. And then how many hospitals are we talking about? I mean, 15,000 nurses is a lot. At the same time, some of these hospitals are probably quite massive.
Yeah, some of these hospitals are absolutely enormous. and they are the they're kind of like, they're not like your community hospitals in smaller towns. These are the hospitals where the actual ruling class comes to get their healthcare. They're enormous. They
the Sinai's of the
yeah,
world.
Sinai, Montefiore. I mean, maybe the ruling class doesn't go to Montefiore, but Montefiore is a massive capitalist enterprise in the Bronx. They basically own the Bronx. And then you have New York Presbyterian.
And I also just want to add a little thing here. The CIU 1199 on the East Coast has about 450,000 members.
450,000 members. Damn.
That's what they advertise.
And what Edith laid out about like what are the main motivation of the workers are striking. Workers are striking right now are the same struggle that these 450,000 people facing in the workplace also. So they, while they're inside working in the same place, they suffer from those repressive conditions together.
Yeah, for sure. I will come back to 1199 because I know some of these unions have actual anti-strike clauses within their contracts, which we'll come back to in terms of what to do. I guess, okay, I want to get a little bit more of the texture of this strikes. I mean, biggest nurses strike in New York history. That's massive. What's the mood been like on the picket lines? I know you guys have been going to the picket lines. You guys actually wrote a leaflet, which we'll come to as well. So how's the mood? What's been the reception amongst the public and generally?
Yeah, so last Monday morning at 6 a.m. I was at Mount Sinai Hospital on the Upper East Side, where the night shift came out to the picket line. You know, the picket line had been forming. The strike officially started at 6 a.m. And it was like euphoria. Like it was like, New Year's Eve or something. I mean, people were just like, no, it was an uncorking, but like the nurses coming out were just like, they're so relieved and to be fighting, to be on strike, it's like, okay, I don't need to deal with this anymore. I can actually try and do something about it. People are hugging each other. There was dancing. It's still dark. It's a freezing January morning. And so it was really, still, that was kind of exciting. And, it wasn't the best morning for getting a lot of conversations going.
Fair enough.
But since then we've had a lot. But basically the pickets that we've encountered, they're very determined. They're very strong. I mean, these women have worked through COVID. They bring up their own families. They're they're not just they're not a random sample of the population. Okay? These women are badass.
Nurses put up with some of the worst conditions and people.
Okay? And they are determined, and they're up there is just like. The picket line is just lovely to be on, because there's women from the Philippines, from all over the Caribbean, from China, from, this is who works in New York. It's all these immigrants.
I mean, this morning it was like -4 Celsius and people were dancing on the picket lines.
Yeah, I've seen some photos on social media. They do look quite impressive, the picket lines.
Yeah.
I think I haven't seen picket lines like that in some time.
Right. Well, that's it. And the union, it's interesting, everybody on that picket line has a hat, scarf, gloves, a rain poncho, a slice of pizza, a cup of coffee. They can organize really well, And it's really glaring when you see what they're not doing. They're not trying to shut down the hospitals. They're not calling for the other unions to come out. They're, they're not calling their own, they're not calling for their nurses in other hospitals to join the strike, So that's really glaring. The union leaders are very much all about play by the rules. So you abide by the no strike clauses, you abide by the laws, and we've been talking to these strikers saying, well, but the bosses don't abide by the rules. They rip them up the minute it suits them. The thing with Governor Hochul, she took away all the licensing rules so that they could hire scabs from out of state, and they don't need a New York state license. But it also means the bosses can put pressure on nursing assistants to just to step it up and do stuff, do work that's outside their grade and they're not properly trained for. So, because it's a strike, so they just get rid of whatever rules they don't like for now, and try and bust the union that way. And the union leaders know we're going to stick by the rules. You know, you're not allowed to shout scab at anybody.
Yeah.
And nobody does, right?
Yeah.
Not allowed to, if you have a contract, like, so 1199 is their contract's not expired. So that's what they're saying. No, our contract's not expired. We couldn't possibly go on strike, you know. Well, when has the no strike clause done any of us any good? You know, it just holds back. It just keeps the unions divided, the workers divided. And, you know, we need to take a lesson from what the bosses are doing and just like, we need to get rid of these rules that don't do us at our side any good.
And I mean, also there's a lot of sentiment from the picket lines that like there's a cycle of contract expiring, small concessions the leadership makes with the bosses in the back rooms, and then it goes around for a while they want some language. It doesn't really gets like materialize in the concrete, and then contract expires, another strike. Just like maintaining this very low repressive state with the staffing, very oppressive environment.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, you guys are, you know, fighting to build union power in New York City hospital unions, at least. So you guys come at this from a position of like, we kind of see the problems with the strategy and so on. When you try and make these arguments on the picket line, is there receptivity to what you guys are saying? Do they see the points about, you know, how the anti-strike clauses hold us back, why 1199 should be out, why, you know, the bosses are totally hypocritical when it comes to following the rules and so on? Do these points resonate? I'm just trying to get a sense of like what the sort of consciousness is like amongst the nurses right now.
I would say, well, actually, Ozan was telling me today on the picket line, you did you run out of leaflets, or you nearly ran out of leaflets?
Yeah, I mean,
people actually wanted stacks. Our leaflets is 11.99. You know, nurses are on the outside. Where's 11.99? Like the nurses have this nice slogan: if nurses are on the outside, there's something wrong on the inside. Right? That's it. So we use that. They're on the outside, but where's 11.99? And so people know that we're trying to agitate 11.99 members to go to your union delegates, tell them we have to be out with the nurses. The delegates are hopefully putting pressure on their leaders and so on, because we need the union to come together and come out with the nurses. So that leaflet, I mean, is just being snatched up. People totally like, yeah, this is so obvious. It's so obvious. Because not only does 1199 have to fight for the nurses, like the nurses say, yeah, we need that backup, but everybody knows their contract's up next. If the nurses get smashed, the 1199 is going to be next. I mean, their contract negotiations, it really started last Monday morning at 6 a.m. when the pickets went up, because it's absolutely in their interests that the nurses win. So then, but on other issues, I would say, yeah, we get a bit more pushback. You know, I think one issue is the scabbing. You know, it's like there's all different things. You know, well, you know, the scabs have been offered $10,000 a week, and they're coming up from the south, and it's like, well, that's like a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow for, you know, women coming up from the south. You know, they're just trying to look after their families too. You know, so there is.
Are people really being offered $10,000 a week to come from southern states to come break the strike? Are you serious?
Let me tell you, the bosses that these nurses are up against, right? So they've done a good job actually in publicizing like the absolutely obscene amounts of monies that the executives get paid. Like one of these executives is on $72,000 a week, right?
A week? Oh my God.
Okay, right. But the thing is, what I like to tell people is, you know, if you're on $72,000 a week, there's still somebody signing your check. So who are those guys? And those guys are the Wall Street executives. The boards of trustees of these hospitals are executives in Goldman Sachs, in Merrill Lynch, in Chase Manhattan. You know, that is who actually runs these hospitals, you know. So you cannot guilt them into saying, well, you know, you really pay, you know, like, you know, if you're paying like one guy enough to hire 1 million nurses, that's really kind of like not a good optic or something. They don't care. They know they're absolutely fine with people knowing they're filthy rich, you know? So you can't guilt them into this. The only thing they understand is actually, stopping the money coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And what that really needs is the union to organize who gets healthcare and who doesn't. So all the outpatient stuff, all the elective surgeries and everything, that should all be stopped. And then the union should organize, there is essential healthcare that's required even during a strike. You have to have an emergency room. You can't get people out of the intensive care and so on. But if the union organized that, there would be no basis for scabbing, right?
Right.
Anyway, there's a lot of different angles on the scabbing question because, some people are really furious. Other people want to make excuses for them. So you do hear a lot of different. And this whole thing, like, well, you can't just shut a hospital because it's a hospital, because it's healthcare. But that's the point. There is essential healthcare that's necessary, but the union should have fully trained, qualified union nurses doing that work and have everybody else out, stop the money coming in.
Yeah.
So that's the strategy we try to put forward to explain how to undercut the bosses' scab herding. And
I think the union statement right before the strike mentioned that the bosses were preparing $100 million a week for the scab budget, which is an absurd amount.
Yeah.
And the crazy issue is if you're getting that many people with barely any training in a totally new ground, that creates insanely unsafe conditions too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think Edith, I really appreciate you laying out just how loaded these hospitals. We're talking about New York City. There's tons of money here, but you're also talking about America, where healthcare. I mean, people go broke. If they have a serious health crisis, they can lose their house. You're talking about America, and here you've got these hospital execs, which are, spending millions just to break a strike, which, from their point of view is the best way to spend their money. But I think it's the question of what the union does, right? And which is what you guys are aiming your targets at, what the union leadership is doing and how it's actually not preparing the strike in the best way possible. The other point I wanted to make, actually, based on what you were saying, is the changing attitudes, I think, towards scabs and scabbing. I experienced this here in Britain as well when we had the strike wave a few years ago, where you can't call anybody a scab because it's insensitive. It's an insult or whatever. Gone are the rules of the class struggle, but it's about niceties and so on. And if you try and convince somebody don't cross a picket line, it's because, oh wait, you could be pressuring them about their individual and personal choice. This is how much the trade unions themselves have really swallowed the liberalism of the past, 30, 40 years, where a decent working class militant can't express their outrage at somebody breaking their strike. We have to be careful about their feelings and whatever, And to this, I actually want to, you guys make a point in one of your leaflets. It's called Nice Now, How to Prepare a Winning Strike. And in that, you guys make a point about how to actually deal with the scabs. Maybe you can just explain the point about how the union and people on the picket line themselves, how they should orient towards the scabs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the leaflet that you refer to, Nice Now, Prepare a Winning Strike, it was put out before the strike. So they've already hired in all these replacement nurses, is the correct term. And so, we were making, so there's not, it's the lead up to a strike. There's just not actually a strike on. So we were making the point to union members, look, talk to these women and suss them out. If they, because there's some people who are just committed strike breakers and they're they don't care. They're going to take the money. They're going to do it. Some people may have fallen into this job not knowing what they were doing. Others could be convinced that actually they need to join the union and respect the picket line. So you got to, you got to argue with people. You got to try and convince people. And before the strike happens, you're doing that in the job. And what we were saying was, if somebody's committed to scabbing, don't train them. And actually, the union leadership would never openly condone such a thing, but 3 nurses were fired from Mount Sinai on the eve of the strike in this like a blatant and quite brutal act of intimidation. They all received voicemails telling that they were fired due to, what was the language? Obstructing training exercise or something like that. No, I mean, what it was they didn't want to, train their own, like, training the scabs is cutting your own throat. So some people really understand that. So the unions filed, objections and protests at these firings and everything. But we're saying, it needs to be a demand of the strike that these nurses have to be rehired. I mean, that's kind of like almost, you'd almost want to insist on that before anything else in the contract. Right? So the consciousness is very varied. Once the strike starts, though, people nobody's innocent. Now everybody knows what's going on. Okay, now it's the time where you have to be like, okay, the lines are drawn.
Pick a side.
And we want there to be nobody able to cross those lines.
For sure.
Because all it does is, let the bosses, keep making money, drive out the union, and make conditions god awful and unsafe for everybody inside that building. So, one thing I wanted to mention, actually, there's another thing about the scabbing. See, as soon as the strike started, these nurses lost their health insurance, and what that means is like that for a lot of people, you can, get by with, you could take a risk, take a chance. Okay, it's a strike. It's it's a fight I want to be in. I'm going to take my chances. But if you've got kids with even just asthma or diabetes or something, and if insurance and you have a crisis, hospital visit, you could be bankrupt. Anyway, it's a terrible, terrible pressure to put on these union members that they want to strike, but they're going to have no health insurance. And so this is another thing where the union has to take this in hand. The union has to organize. If the union today put out a call to the other unions in the city saying, we need emergency funds for medical care for our strikers, money would come flooded in. All kinds of workers would want to contribute to something like that, and it would take a massive pressure off of the strikers.
Yeah.
So, so things like that, that the union's not doing because it just wants to play by the same old rules. But, these rules don't work anymore. So,
yeah. So, as we mentioned at the start, this is now it is now concluding its 8th day. What do you think is ahead? I mean, I think, Ozan, you were saying before we started recording that some members seem to be surprised that it's lasted this long. So what do you think is actually on the horizon? What's happening to the mood?
I mean, like we mentioned, it's very cold. There's still people out there, but I think it can be easily said that they didn't think that it was going to be dragged. And the management is clearly trying to pressure this into some kind of conciliation in this kind of time. But right now, I think what will be a real change in that tract is other unions joining in. For example, this hospital with the scabs and also other unions, they still they're still able to keep it running. And even in our committee's name, if we were able to actually get other unions to be able to join their struggle, that would be a key thing to change the course of this. And I think very easy to say that, compared to 2023, I think it's very easy to say the world is a little different today. It's a very basic consciousness that this is not going to be the last fight. The attacks are coming. That's a very shared thought. And we're trying to prepare for it. And I think one of our leaflets about nurses are outside with 1199 also puts this question on a broader term. Community is suffering with the worsening economic conditions, etc. And also 1199's contract is coming up soon too, later this year. So, yeah.
I think those are good points. I do have a question. What do you think are the chances of that happening? of other unions coming out? I know you guys are fighting for it, and I know that those
Yeah.
arguments are very attractive to the nurses currently out on strike right now. But I think, that's what you need to go forward and win this thing. But what do you think are the chances of that happening, or what stands in the way, I guess?
Well, honestly, during the pickets, sometimes in their lunch breaks, etc., 1199ers to join too, or like you get talk to other workers in the hospitals, other unions. But I mean, the big elephant in the room is the 1199 leadership. It is, it's very, I think it was last week that they gave their solidarity remarks. They gave their speeches at one of the picket lines, very emotional and all that. But although there is very basic and hard sentiment for the basic questions that Eisen is striking right now, there's that kind of shared solidarity. The union leadership currently today is a very big obstacle to actually make these realize, and it's a very dividing force, in a way, very demoralizing, alienating force for both unions and all the workers in a way.
Yeah. I don't really want to admit how bleak I think the chances are of the other unions coming out. I would prefer to just say, look, yes, this is the obstacles, but what we fight for is what's necessary, and there's real resonance for it. We've leafleted, obviously on the picket lines, but we've also been to the hospitals. Some hospitals that are not on strike, to agitate there, because 1199, everybody's watching, all hospital workers anyway, they're all watching the strike, and they all know that the stakes are kind of high. So we want to spell out that, the key lesson here is we need a leadership that is forged in joint union struggle. That is going to turn things around for our class.
Yeah.
And lay out some concrete stuff how to build such a leadership. So if we have picket lines that mean don't cross, that is we just scrapped the no strike clause from the 1199 contract. That is already exactly how to build such a leadership that's forged in joint class struggle, joint union struggle.
Yeah, for sure. Before I come to sort of the broader impacts of this strike, I do have one question. I think this is a question that comes up every time there's a strike in the public sector, and things like healthcare and education. There's a huge blackmail that the bosses and the government, they start to throw. And this often also happens in sectors that are women heavy. So I can imagine in healthcare, I think you've already touched on it a little bit, Edith, about, but if you're striking, then you're jeopardizing patients' health or things like that. And I was just wondering, could you give us a feel for if that's a factor in the strike right now or how that's being dealt with? Just curious.
Yeah. I mean, certainly, like there's the New York Post, it's like a Murdoch rag. It's full of that. All these nurses, they want to, be stoned and drunk when they're working, and all this crazy stuff, right? But no nonsense is too low for that paper. But I don't, the way the cost of living crisis is playing out, I don't think other workers, workers in the gig economy and that think that the nurses are being selfish, like what they deal with, and, just to be able to live near where you work. I mean, it's, not outrageous ask, is it? For the bosses act like it is, but, I just don't see it that way.
Yeah, I do think there's like the bosses or government etc. always tries to go into this kind of like moralist backlash, or I think like during the COVID time etc. points like national unity etc. like we're all in this together, trying to push that is a thing. But if you work in a hospital, that like you're trying to give your best for the patients, you try to make it safe, you're trying to make it good. Usually, not even usually, most of the time. And despite the management's attempts to conciliate from establishing that, the demand of safe staffing, it's safe staffing, not like more staffing, it's safe staffing. And then honestly, like that's a very like a horrendous backlash that they try to use against in these kind of industries.
Look, the thing I wanted to pose to you guys, I mean, you guys are on the ground, you guys been to the picket lines, but more importantly, like you guys are currently living in Trump's America. And I wanted to get your thoughts on what the implications of this class battle are. You know, if it goes forward and actually there is a victory for the nurses' strike, what do you think could happen? But on the other hand, if this is kind of dragged out and leads to a slow defeat. Right now, the country, you know, you've got Minneapolis happening a few states over. You've got a, reign of terror slowly being established. Things are not looking good for majority of the working class in the United States. And like this, to me, this is, yes, it's in one state, but it's still, I think, a pretty significant class battle. And I think it has potential within it to maybe be a spark for other things, but also, depending on how it goes, it could also actually, seal in some of the fear and I think anxiety at what's ahead. So I wanted to get your take on what you think is next.
No, the cost of losing this is going to be horrible. It is going to just, I mean, you can see how Trump just has the wind in his sails and doing whatever he wants. So any defeat like that's just going to compound everything. People are, workers are terrified of ICE for good reason. But the only way to actually make this battle a victory for our side, to make it give the government any pause, is to really make it a show of strength of labor. And you see what the union leaders are doing is they're just desperately wishing that the Democrats would get their shit together and be in opposition. Like the leaders of 1199, they're doing whatever Chuck Schumer wanted. Like the government shutdown, for God's sake. That was meant to be over healthcare. And all it did was lay workers off. Make them work with no pay. And then 1 in 6 Americans that's on food stamps, they went hungry. It's like, this is your strategy. This strike is absolutely could be the spark of what's necessary, but it's absolutely got to be a fight against the current leadership and their ties to the Democratic Party to unleash the power that really exists to, make the government take a back step.
I mean, I think like one thing that can be very exposed in our eyes right now is like these years long of class collaboration leadership with the Democratic Party or another, party of the bosses. Kind of left the working class, the unions, open to the attacks also, or, it's weakened greatly. And now that we're seeing these kind of attacks intensifying, that those tools of, how to be able to resist, or these defensive tools like unions, etc., are not where they should be in a way. I mean, I think Minneapolis showed very clear that these goons that are carrying these kind of things out, what they can do when you actually try to go against these repressions. And like should be a wake-up call in a way to actually be able to break from this strategy of the leadership in the class collaboration strategy and chart a different road. I think it's very clearly exposed in the clearly in front of the eyes. The question is there right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's often in the course of struggle where these illusions will be broken. And I feel like you guys are, doing your part and really pushing those key questions forward because, bottom line, it does come down to what are the union leaders doing? Because it's in their hands. They control it, but it's the politics, And if your politics is to look to the bosses and work within this, work within the rules that are set up by the bosses, then it's not a recipe for victory. So, yeah. Okay. One last question, which is the US is doing crazy things right now in the world. We just had Venezuela happened 2 weeks ago now. I was just wondering, like on the picket lines, are you guys having conversations about broader things that are happening in the US or in the world right now? Like, I'm trying to get a sense of like how political the vibes are.
I mean, in my experience, it has been mainly about the strike, but certainly, Minneapolis really opens things up because, like I say, a lot of the workers in New York are terrified of ICE. Everybody's they're an immigrant or has somebody they're living with, whatever. And the guy who shot Renee Good was trained by U.S. imperialism's colonial occupation of Iraq. So this is U.S. imperialism coming home, and this is what they're trying to do to workers and Black and brown people. So certain people I've spoken to definitely see that connection. That this is a step, beyond what's normal. And so you have these ICE guys. They're like these, colonial stormtroopers. They've openly recruited a lot of fascists, and they're really on the rampage. And people are not going to take it lying down. But again, what do we do about that? And then there's like at one location we go to, there's quite a lot of Filipino nurses. There's, you can have more conversations about the role of U.S. imperialism there. But
for sure,
And I think some do know that when the imperialist aggression of the U.S. increases, that gets squeezed out of the workers at home too. And it is already to a degree felt. So there's that kind of, sentiment too, I guess.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah, it's true. People are scared. People think there might be another war and they're scared. They don't want their kids being recruited and, all this disgusting.
Okay. Well, look, I haven't got any more questions about the strike. Is there anything else you guys wanted to add?
Well, I just think of one thing is since the strike started, we've had more like interaction with people wanting to talk and meet and following us on the socials and everything. So we're really keen to have another way of meeting people. So what we're telling everybody is there's an event on Saturday in New York on the Lower East Side. It's called the Holiday Appeal for Class War Prisoners. It's a fundraiser for prisoners such as Mumi Abu-Jamal and Leonard Peltier, who are class struggle heroes, people who fought for their people and been targeted by the government for that. And it's also an event where all different groups can come with their leaflets and their papers, and we can, actually discuss. We can discuss cases. Some people know about some cases, other people others, because we don't. The bosses aren't interested in using their media to tell us all about their victims, but there's also going to be discussion about how to, push the class struggle forward. So that's an event we're telling everybody to come there and meet us at that event. It's St. Mark's Church, 3-6 on the Bowery on Saturday.
Okay. I will link that information in the show notes. You guys also have, I guess, I'll link the social media information in the show notes as well, where people can follow you guys and keep up with your work.
All that.
Cool.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to tell us what's going on in New York City in this important battle. We wish you guys all the luck, and more importantly, all the nurses out there in the cold on the picket lines. Wish them all the luck and victory. Alrighty. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, I ain't got no smoke, at least not with you. And I don't know if you don't know, but there are just a few of oligarchs and capitalists profiting massive profits, holding us down in lockstep. And your vote, it ain't gonna stop them.